Thank you to all the participants joining us this morning for the Cybersecurity Education for Board Members webinar. We have Tony Scott from Technical Financial Solutions with us here, and nice of Tony to fly up from Georgia last night and flew up for this webinar specifically. Went out to a nice dinner last night.
Yeah, thanks to you, Scott.
Yeah, had a little, and I was sharing with colleagues here in the room that we were going over this presentation at dinner, and all the tables around us started to clear out. I guess
security and auditing will clear a room quick, right?
it was a little strange talking about cybersecurity at dinner. So anyway, again, glad to have us, glad to have you guys with us. I'm Scott Esworthy, a partner here at Brown, Schultz, Sheridan, Fritz in the insurance niche. And we've worked with Tony and his group for probably a decade plus, doing IT reviews and our financial statement audits. Anything you want to share, Tony?
No, it's just been it's been a great relationship, and we've enjoyed working in the insurance industry, and so looking forward to being able to bring up some new information related to these new laws on cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I think we're going to try to keep it top level, but at the same time, we're going to have to hit a couple technical items. But hopefully, especially all the board members on the call, I think we're going to try to have some good takeaways for you today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something you can go back to at your next board meeting and ask a question or two to make sure things are being handled properly, or at least getting them started in the right direction. Right. All right. Well, you ready to get started?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. All right.
Well, we're going to start off with a really highly technical slide here. No, this is just a little story I want to share with you guys. I'm all about applications and applying things in real life to my work environment. And this is a picture of a lake there in Georgia, one of our favorite lakes. We love to boat. So typically, twice a year, we'll go for a weekend and go take the boat for a long weekend. Well, this year, I guess it was 2 years ago, I convinced my family to take our week-long vacation at the lake. And so my job was to plan what activities we were going to do and really kind of plan the whole thing out. And so I like being able to boat up to dinner, be able to travel to dinner via boat. So I looked at, okay, what could we do? Also, I wanted to have one evening that we could go see live music via boat. So if you look at this map, you'll see two red circles. There's a red circle on the left-hand side of the screen, down kind of low, and then in the top right there's another red circle. So the left was where we started, and then and by the way, this is not for this webinar. This is I know you guys are like, wow, really? I did this pre-planning for this trip, and because I wanted to find out how far of a boat ride.
Taken vacation planning.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was a big responsibility. So what I did was I created this so that I could see, okay, how long of a boat ride is this? It turns out it's about 45 minutes were my calculations to get to this one area. But the problem was this was the only place they were going to have live music, to my knowledge, for our whole stay. So we really didn't have a choice in my mind. Okay, this was day one. We get there, we put the boat in. It's going great. I've never ridden this route before, so I've got my chart plotter and I'm tracking my route. Gotcha. We get there. I knew there was rain coming in. I'd looked at the forecast, so I had done my homework. I knew what the forecast showed, and basically we just beat the storm to this location. And this picture is us. After the storm kind of came in while we were eating, it cleared, and we were able to go back out to the boat after dinner. The young lady who was singing was setting up. You can barely see her up towards the building. So it was in my mind, this is a success. We basically beat the storm. In the summer, the storm goes and it passes. We're perfect.
As a dad, you're feeling pretty good.
I'm feeling good because you're owning this, right? And so our boat's perfectly located where we can enjoy the music. This was at 8 o'clock, right? Everything's beautiful. So if you look 8:05, we get the family pic in the background. Everybody's happy. And then what happens is our phones, our watches, all the digital world begins to beep. Alerts start that there's another storm coming through. Well, I didn't know about this storm. So we immediately, pulled up and said, okay, let's go. Well, we've got a 45-minute boat ride back. And so my goal was to beat the storm to that corner and then cut back up. Well, as you can see by this next picture, that did not work. No. We got about halfway into the route home, and we got engulfed in 3 to 5 foot waves and 25 mile an hour winds. And it really, I look back at it now, we kind of laugh about some of these things, but it was not a laughing moment. I mean, it really was sobering and scary. We had to dock in that situation. And just as an aside, there was a bolt of lightning that came down as we were docking, and the next day we found out it took out the elevator in the condos we were staying in. So, I mean, this was really close. And I know you folks out there that are watching are going, what in the world does that have to do with data security, right? Everything, really, everything. It says, basically what we're talking about is that you've got to go through and say, okay, what are our risks? So if you go to the next slide, this is from a boating perspective. These are different tools that you have to minimize risks. You look at, you've got glasses, you've got throw cushions, life jacket. And I just put on here, you got to rethink your threats, your tools, your preparation, and what the consequences are. And one thing I want to point out that I'll come back to you later is, if you notice that red throw cushion, if you look in the picture in the center, if you see those red throw cushions, they're tucked in the seat. I'll mention that later, but it's kind of a funny point about that.
And we're actually going to use these pictures throughout
we'll bring these around.
So highlight different points in the presentation.
Yeah, so maybe they'll make a little more sense as we go through. But I just made a note here. Risk exists all around us. And, when you think about boating and you think about the summer, I mean, storms are part of it. And you've really got to plan for that. You've got to look to that. And when you talk about data, and we bring this kind of bridge this over to cybersecurity, when you talk about data and you talk about deep sensitive information like you have in the insurance industry, like there is in the healthcare industry. There's phishing, there's hackers, there's people that want to get that data. So we've got to realize that, and we've got to avoid as much of the risk as we can. We need to be aware of our surroundings and adjust when possible. Also, we need to embrace the precautionary measures, like training and so forth. And then the other thing that I like is that we need to adhere to safety regulations, even going beyond what's required maybe by law. So there are some of those that happen in the boating.
Especially too, because different states, the companies might write in, might have different rules and regs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Because we'll touch upon that a little later. Okay, so these are the 5 core areas that Tony will be discussing today: cybersecurity landscape, core cyber risk principles for the board, laws and regs, security areas to consider, and now what? So, and one item just to mention, as part of just prepping for the course, I was reading Verizon put out their own survey of in 2019 of attacks and what are the type of entities that are being attacked the most. And actually 43%, and they said consistent with prior surveys, was small businesses. Okay. So some of the companies participating today are larger insurance companies.
Right.
Some are smaller. You
right.
know? Might be companies with 10 or less people.
Right.
So many times they will say, well, no one's never going to go after us. Actually,
right.
that's the low-hanging fruit, if you will.
Right.
The easier target is sometimes the smaller businesses.
You're exactly right. And those smaller businesses, even though they may be small in employee numbers, have a lot of information for policyholders, a lot of data that's very valuable.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so our first picture, this is one of those life jacket. And what I like about this one is this is a legal requirement, right? If you're in a boat, you have got to have life jackets for everybody. So it's something that you certainly are required to have. But one note about this, I have a different view of life jackets. If we have to bring our kids out of the bow of the boat for a storm, right. You put your life jackets on. Ours are all stored away, right? Like most people in a boat. That's not, you don't have to wear them by law, but right. Sometimes you need to go beyond the law.
Right. And I see you have a little ad for Bass Pro Shop.
Bass Pro Shop, right, exactly.
That's nice.
I should have blurred that out, right?
Okay.
So the cybersecurity landscape, what I really wanted to do was talk a little bit about, okay, what's really going on out there to paint a bigger picture, because it's not just the insurance industry. It's not just, the healthcare industry or the banking. It's really everybody. So we put down in here HIPAA security. We talked about a little bit about GDPR, and then most recently CCPA, and we'll talk about each of those individually. HIPAA kind of led the pack, if you will. They're probably about 9 years ago. The HIPAA security rule, which was published in 1996, the government implemented the requirements and said, okay, we're going to make sure that you're doing these things.
Okay.
So that happened in, like I said, about 2009. And so for about the past 10 years, you've really seen a lot more, focus in the media. You've seen a lot more about the breaches, and part of that, knowing about those breaches, is because they're required to report them.
I see.
So some of the numbers that you may see go, wow, gosh, the insurance industry is really low on breaches. Well, I think part of that is because there hasn't been as much of a requirement to.
Because the laws
exactly,
and
exactly.
weren't in place yet.
So we'll go into these, and let's hit that slide on the HIPAA. Did you have a comment on that?
No, I was just going to say, I remember within the past year or so, we were having a meeting. You came up and was talking with our insurance practice, and that's what I learned. I didn't know HIPAA was on the forefront of all this. I knew it affected when I went to go to the doctor's office and how I sign in and things like that, but that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So a lot of these laws are coming out of those laws and those regulations.
Right, exactly. And some of the folks on the webinar today may even be impacted by HIPAA regulations because they're housing electronically protected health information, so they may already have gone down that route. But like I said, HIPAA came out in '96, and it really began the enforcement in '09. So we'll move on to the GDPR. That's another one that actually went into effect in May of 2018. So they've been talking about it for a while, but it was kind of been quiet until May, and then of course everybody was, wait, are we ready? Right. That related to European Union. And so when I first saw this, I thought, okay, well, how is Europe going to impose anything on us, right? That whole U.S. mentality, right? Well, no, exactly. I don't think so. But the reality is there's cooperation between the U.S. and the European Union, and there have been court cases already where U.S.-based companies have violated the GDPR regulations and have been, held accountable to that. So when you start seeing that, and I don't think that really applies to most of the folks on this webinar, but to me it lays a landscape. It really shows that there's a big shift in the way that we're going about protecting user data and end user data. And there's a lot on that slide, but the next piece that really came into play that has just hit and it's kind of hot off the press is what's called CCPA, which is California Consumer Privacy Act. And I knew this was going to happen because that's where it was going, right? It has now made it, now this is a US-based law. So this is a California law that very closely. It's
coming out of the GDPR?
It's absolutely. Very closely resembles GDPR. And I think it is the first state of many that will pass this type of consumer law to protect the privacy. In fact, Arizona has got one. I think Arizona's may take effect sooner than California's, but January 1 of 2020 for California. And it just is an extremely consumer-friendly mentality of how do you have to protect that data. And that today we're not trying to get into the details of GDPR or CCPA, but really just to paint a picture and say, okay.
So no matter if you're an insurance company on the board of an insurance company or whatever type of business, these are the laws and regs that are coming down the pike that are going to affect all businesses.
Right, exactly. And it's easy to fall into the mindset of, well, like healthcare. They're just picking on healthcare. It's everybody.
This is everybody. Okay. All right.
Oh yeah, my next little tool here, and if you're a boater, you may wonder, okay, what do we have that for? Yeah, well, by the way, in my boat trip back, I had planned on a leisurely evening in the dark ride. And so as the storm came in, it got dark. So you can't wear sunglasses to protect from the rain. So these are actually clear glasses so that you can actually have clear vision in pounding rain. So I have those on my boat ready at this point. But it's funny, we were talking earlier, this really moves into, because when we're talking about the board, the clear vision is everything, right? And so when we talk about oversight, that's exactly where we're going.
Exactly. Okay. Let's go into the next section here.
So let's kind of move into the core cyber risk principles. This actually came out.
This is where we're getting a little bit more technical.
Yeah. So you guys, please don't fall. We have people that can tell if you fall asleep. So please don't make us call you out. But no, we won't do that, I promise. So, yeah, this is getting a little more technical, and this actually came out of a Security Alliance document out of the UK, but it's a great handbook. So we referenced that there. So we'll go through a few of the pieces of that.
Okay.
So security is an enterprise-wide issue. For so long when we talk about, data security and IT, and that's the IT folks. It's not that way anymore.
Right.
Today it is an enterprise-wide solution, and as we're talking about from a board perspective, this really needs to be a topic ongoing for the
Right.
board. So organizations of all sizes should boost the engagement of the boards into oversight for this.
I've mentioned at recent presentations that it used to be in the past that the major risk for any insurance company is always claim reserves.
Right.
Well, now I think IT risks are creeping up, and probably soon will be passing
Right.
that risk.
So legal implications is another comment here. A director should understand the legal regulatory implications of cybersecurity risks and as they relate to their company's specific circumstances. When we talk about some of these laws, there are thresholds and number of employees of does this apply. But then the other thing to keep in mind is some of the states have different thresholds. So that's something that you want to keep an eye on is, okay, what thresholds are we accountable to?
Yeah, that's something we're going to touch on a couple times today. So I know a lot of my clients are licensed in multiple states,
Right.
business in multiple states. So you have, as a management team, as a board, you need to be aware of what are these cyber laws that are being
Right.
passed in these other states. It's very important. And we're going to go into this a little bit more later, but that's a key point.
Okay.
Whoops. And these are...
Yeah, just
go
a
ahead.
list of the states. And, kind of the thing to point here is we've got 9 states to date as of, I think this was early September, that have passed the NAIC's insurance data model law, which of course was a template. And each of these states have passed their version of that law. Now, they all closely resemble it, but they do have some tweaks like we were talking about, like the threshold of minimum employees and that kind of
Right.
thing. But one thing really to note about this slide is look at how recently these are.
Yes.
New York led the way. They were out there actually. They may have actually been before NAIC's model law. But South Carolina, so we had 4 states from May to December of last year that passed the law. And then just in this year alone, we had another 5 states.
Right.
So you can see the
It's
progression and the
happening
speed.
rapidly,
Yeah,
right?
it really is.
Yeah. And I would anticipate, just my opinion, in 2020, there's probably going to be quite a few states that make this a law.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at this list, there are some states on this list that might be rivals of Georgia, like maybe Alabama. That I'm disappointed that they made this list before Georgia did. Georgia actually declared 2019 as Cybersecurity Profession Year.
Oh my goodness.
So not just it's this month we're going to focus on it. So you're going to see there's going to be pressure.
Well, like I said, folks, this Tony's from Georgia. So
That's right.
You're going to get a little sense of that throughout the presentation.
Just a little bit of a
today.
slant, right?
Exactly. All right.
So another point there from the handbook is really just focusing on board agenda time, making sure that the board has allotted time to talk about cybersecurity and talk about the laws and, okay, how does it impact us?
Right. And this is an area, too, some of our clients recently have had experts, yourself, you've come into one of our clients, to give the board some education.
Right.
Okay? Because that's, I've had conversations with a couple board members that came to me and said, I feel like I know a little bit about it, but I don't feel like I know enough to actually challenge management.
Right.
To actually, when management gives me a report to review, do I know enough to go back and challenge them with questions and things like that? So that's where getting some extra education for the board members can really help.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I talked earlier, and I'm not going to tell you which slide it is until we get to it. So those that are watching, you're going to have to pay attention. There are maybe 1 or 2 slides that if I was only going to print 1 or 2, it'd be those.
Right.
And so when we get there, I'll point it out. So that means you got to listen and really pay attention.
All right.
So going into cyber risk management, the National Association of Corporate Directors, or NACD handbook, specifically mention the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework. So now let me break that into my language. We refer to that as NIST. And
Okay.
NIST in the IT world is kind of the gold standard.
Okay.
So NIST, they have a cybersecurity framework, and NIST, that framework it was created to enable organizations, regardless of their size, to be able to measure themselves, measure the controls they have in place to apply the principles of best practice of risk management and improve those controls in cybersecurity.
And is this sort of the basis? Later on, you're going to talk about risk assessments and things like that. That ties back to this framework.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely does. And so when we get into the laws require a risk assessment. And you need to have a framework that you use for that. Now, you're not required to use NIST CSF, but it is a very well received and accepted, commonly used framework.
Like you said, the gold standard.
Right.
Okay.
And then dealing with the risk, the board and management, they need to have discussions on cyber risk. And it should include identification of which risks apply to them, which ones they need to avoid, which are, that they can accept. What's the level of risk?
Right.
Just like any other risk that you're dealing with. So, we're talking about cybersecurity today, but they already do this on a ongoing basis of looking at, okay, what are our risks? Are they acceptable? And that's really the effort here, is not only to look at the controls you have in place, but to really quantify the risk and say, okay, what's our highest risks and what's our plan of action? What do we need to do about that?
Right. And maybe you can touch upon a little bit, when these laws, like we just listed, it's about 9 states that have already adopted this. What we're seeing, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, when it is adopted, you don't have much ramp-up time.
Right.
So you actually don't want to be sitting there waiting, to read the law has been adopted.
Right.
Because what we've seen is the ramp-up time for the company to be compliant is about a year.
Right.
Okay. And then likewise, you'll touch upon later, the third-party administrators, let's say the claim admin folks, agencies, and so forth.
Right.
There's a level of compliance that the company has to have with them.
Right.
And that's usually 2 years.
Right.
What we're seeing. So, so it's something to start thinking about now. And if not already,
Yeah, well, and it goes back
especially with Pennsylvania hasn't adopted the law yet. So
Right, exactly.
But it's, as we've talked about, it's got to be coming very soon.
Right, and you've got neighbors that have adopted, you've got other cases that we'll talk about, but it's one of those situations where when things begin to happen, kind of like the life jacket in the boat.
Right.
But I wasn't required by law to have those life jackets on. But now in hindsight, when I look back at that situation, I think about the risks that were there.
Right.
That if in that docking in 3-foot waves and 25-mile-an-hour winds, you could have easily gone overboard. The life jacket was critical. Now, so if I had to do it again, now I know what I would do differently. So it's get ahead of it.
Exactly. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Whoops. All right.
Yeah, I kind of laugh because when you look at this slide, this is another one of those tools in the boat. It looks like a noose to me, right? And I kind of laugh because I didn't intend it to go along with the laws and regs, but it's not a noose, it's a docking rope. And what's significant about this is from a tool perspective, when you're in a rough situation having to dock, you want a longer docking rope, and that's what that is.
Gotcha.
So let's talk about laws and regulations a little bit.
Talk about Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, right? Okay. Exactly. So we'll hit on Pennsylvania's. There was a Supreme Court. We'll talk about case. We'll talk about, and then NAIC security model, and then some of the states and federal laws.
All right.
So what's significant here? We talked already. Pennsylvania has not adopted the insurance data security law, right?
Right.
But I believe it was November, December of last year, there was a Supreme Court case that recognized a common law duty for employers to safeguard employees' data. And this was, again, November 21st of 18. And the key there is the employer has a common law duty to use reasonable care to safeguard the employee's personal information if it's stored on an internet-facing accessible computer. And you may not think, well, that's that big of a deal. But this has large implications, not just in Pennsylvania, but really everywhere.
And this is another item it's not insurance specific.
Right. Nor is it healthcare specific.
Right. This is related to businesses in general.
Exactly.
So if you happen to be on boards for participants, if you're on boards of multiple different types of companies, this is something to be aware of. Okay.
Yeah, and so in that, the collection of employees' personal information creates a foreseeable risk. So the fact that they were capturing their social security number, other personal information, you've created a risk by capturing that and housing that on a server like that a breach could happen, right? Then the other thing was the employer has the duty of reasonable care. They've got to take care of that data, and I think that's I don't think that that's an administrative type, anything that comes with a who's in the White House or who's in Congress. I mean, that's just a common thought.
Right.
You got to take care of that data. And then so UPMC, they basically ruled that a cyber criminal might take advantage of the vulnerabilities in the UPMC's computer system and steal that information. Thus, the data breach was within the scope of the risk that UPMC should have foreseen.
And just to clarify too, because I remember I had the question when I was reviewing this presentation. We're not taking it to the level, or the law's not taking it to the level. If, let's say, if employees here at the firm are going on the work computers and looking
Right.
up their own personal bank account information,
Right.
it's not taking it to the level that the company has to protect that. It's
Right,
in
no.
regards to other data that.
Right. So what it's in regards to is the company, UPMC in this case, requiring I need your personal data for our payroll, for our whatever, and no, not your action on your own choice, you're
Gotcha.
choosing, but something that you're
the
required
actions,
to hand over
from
that
the
information.
business. Gotcha. Okay.
This is my favorite. So we have the big disclaimer up there. We probably
Right.
should have put that in highlighted, but we are not lawyers, right?
We are not.
We are not
We're nowhere
lawyers.
even close.
Yeah, exactly. But we do live with laws all around us, right?
Exactly.
That impact us. So
Right.
we did want to make some bring in some thoughts here. I put the decisions likely to have a significant impact on cybersecurity related litigation in and beyond Pennsylvania. And so as we deal with this, litigation matters. Even though we're not lawyers, it impacts our clients, and it's something that our clients are concerned about.
Exactly.
What happens then. The other thing was talks about negligence appears to be a viable cause. The fact that UPMC was found negligent in not taking reasonable care over that data was a viable cause of action. The responsibility to protect the data appears to be tied to the act of collecting it, kind of like we
Right.
talked about.
Like we just
They were
mentioned,
collecting
yeah.
that data, so once you've had that action of collecting that data,
Then you have
your
responsibilities.
responsibility.
Yeah, you have
Right, exactly.
responsibilities. Okay. All right.
So again, we talked about Pennsylvania, that law being in place. The next thing we want to talk a little bit about is maybe just some highlights on the NAIC's insurance security model law.
Okay.
So back in 2015, of course, everybody knows about the huge Anthem insurance breach. 80 million customers were considered. I mean, it was really considered a wake-up call in the
Right.
in the
Definitely.
security world. And in 2015, the NAIC published 12 principal guidelines for regulatory guidance. So it began, the wheels began to turn.
And again, do you think those 12 principles, they came out of the HIPAA?
Oh yeah, yeah. And there's such a common fiber, a common thread.
Okay.
If you look at the model law that we are talking about today,
Right.
and you look at the HIPAA security rule, there are core pieces that are identical.
Almost copy and paste
Administrative,
on some
technical,
of them, right?
physical categories, they're exactly the same.
Right.
And the
Interesting.
requirement for the risk assessment, which we're going to get to, again, it's a requirement in healthcare as well.
Gotcha. Okay.
So then in October of 17, NAIC, they actually issued the Insurance Data Security Model Law, which again was really a template, truly a model of a law, and that's what the states have been using to pass, the 9 states that have passed it. And again, they have made some tweaks and changes, customizations, and added to and taken away,
Okay.
but the core has been pretty much the same. And it's a big step requiring more stringent security measures, and then again, like we said, it very closely resembles HIPAA.
All right.
So the information security, this is section 4 out of the model law, and it's a focus on information security program. The objectives is what we want to talk about, then we want to highlight a little bit of that, and then we want to talk a little bit about the risk assessment.
And this portion specifically of the data security model law, we reviewed quite a bit with our clients this past busy season when we were doing our audit committee presentations and board presentations, and really focusing on section 4.
Right.
Especially because this is what you'll touch upon. This is the area that discusses board oversight.
Right, exactly. So let's just hit the top objectives here for the information security program, or the ISP as we'll refer to it occasionally. And that's to protect the security and the confidentiality of non-public information. And again, just pretty straightforward, protect against threats and hazards to the security and the integrity of it, protect against unauthorized access, folks getting to it that shouldn't be, minimize the likelihood of harm. Of course, we can't completely eliminate the likelihood of something bad happening, but we certainly can minimize it. I always think about your home. You know, a lot of people go, well, if they want to get to that data, they can get to it, right?
Sure,
But if you look at your home as an example, it doesn't mean you just leave all your doors and windows open.
Right.
I mean, you know, you take reasonable precautions. You lock the doors, you lock the windows, you may have an alarm system, and it helps reduce that likelihood of that home theft occurring.
And one thing I've heard as a basic theme many times is the regulators ultimately are looking that you have a plan.
Right.
And this day and age, you know, the likelihood of a company being subject to a cybersecurity attack is pretty likely, but you really need to have a plan.
Right. And one tendency, I'll just to add on to that, one tendency that we've seen in the market, whether it's insurance or healthcare, is the mentality of we want to wait until we look really good to do a risk assessment.
Good point.
We don't want to have a report that shows we have problems, and the waiting turns into more waiting and more waiting because it's almost you're never going to get
kicking the can down the road, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But what you really want to have is you want to have that plan, and that plan really comes from that risk assessment, finding out where you are, and then developing that plan, and then working the plan, and then all over again, measuring.
And we'll get into it a little bit, but last night when we were chatting over dinner, you had mentioned, you know, get those risk assessments done. Let's find out where the weaknesses are.
Yeah, exactly.
Soon, so you can start addressing those.
Yeah, don't wait till you got 12 months to have it all together.
Right,
you know,
exactly.
like in the Pennsylvania example,
it's
not a law yet, but get in front of it.
Okay.
So this is section 4.e of the rule here, or the law, the model law. Oversight by the board. This is
the page,
slide.
right?
All right, so if you were asleep, you may want to wake up for just a couple of minutes, hit screen print here. This is the one page I would print if I was on a board. If I was a board member, because it's really a good short list here. So we talk about require management to develop, implement, and maintain the ISP. So as the board, you're looking upon management.
Oversight.
Yeah, you've got oversight. You're looking to your management to handle this, and you want to know, where are we on this?
Yeah.
Review the written report at least annually for management. You know, require them to come back to you and say, okay, where are we?
Right.
And if you look under that, any material, look at the status of the ISP and the compliance with the Act. Okay, where are we with our security program? How are we from a compliance standpoint? Have we done a risk assessment? And then moving into the material matters that relate to the ISP, ask for the risk assessment. You know, I want to actually see, how did we do? Where are we at? How are we moving forward?
We'll touch upon that, but that's something that has to be done annually.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Again, once this is adopted with your domicile state, you'll be required to submit a report, and it has to be done annually.
Right.
And likewise, the risk assessment is annual.
Right. Exactly.
And that's a big item. I mean,
it really is.
That is not a
well, it's a
brief
never-ending
task.
cycle. It
Right,
really is.
exactly.
You know, you do the risk assessment and you measure, okay, where are we? And then you're continually modifying your plan, working the plan, and then you keep going back, risk assessment. Now, and not to miss here, a couple more items on this slide, third-party service provider arrangements. You know, from a board perspective, I would want to know, okay, what third parties do we have that could create a risk for us? And I think there are a lot of third-party providers out there that we don't really think about as being a potential risk.
Right.
But if
you immediately think of, you know, claims TPAs,
right?
Okay, you think of agencies, insurance agencies,
right?
But then there's
others,
ones.
yeah.
You
in fact,
really have to go through the process to think about this.
Right, exactly. In fact, you know, you and I were talking. I was at in Georgia at a meeting earlier this week for a print and mail facility. And so if you think about it, you know, they're getting data from a company, and then they're printing the statements, the invoices, whatever. And, you know, you don't really think about the fact that they have that sensitive data that needs to be protected.
So this law has taken this to the level of the company has to have awareness of what their cybersecurity measures are and protections as well.
Right.
I was at a presentation last week for PAMIC, and the speaker was talking about they are actually already sending out questionnaires to their agencies to understand this.
Right.
I thought it was a good best practice that a lot of companies should start thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you can do that in advance of the law being adopted. You know,
yeah, you sure can.
Yeah, it's a business relationship you have, so it'd be a reasonable question to send out.
And then this just continues, Section 4, this is letter F out of that section of the law, and it's talking about the third parties, the oversight. Third-party service provider means that a business unit is not subject to the insurance data security law that maintains, processes, stores. So they're that third party, right? But yet they're still maintaining that data there when, potentially using the data.
And that's something to emphasize here for the users of this webinar too. We are just pulling out little what we think are key excerpts from the law.
Right.
There's entire sections on risk assessment, entire sections on risk management, notification to the regulators. I mean, but we didn't want this to be a 4-hour webinar.
We're gearing it towards a board, right?
But there's going to, the way it's drafted, there's laws and specifics about all these areas.
Right.
And these areas we're trying to emphasize relate to the board and how that ties back and what's required and so forth.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and then 4H is just talking about the annual certification, and that annual submission, as I think you mentioned earlier, is to the commissioner due February 15th, and then the certifying compliance with Section 4.
Now again, to clarify, the law for Pennsylvania companies, the law hasn't been adopted yet, so that's a date that's actually in the model law as it's drafted. Right. But we've seen that's how the other states who have adopted the law, such as Ohio, they're using that date. They're not extending it further. So, so again, think about that. So if your state adopts the law, you have 1 year to ramp it up. And then, so at the same time, I'm an accountant. So at the same time you're trying to wrap up your closing your books and working on your annual statement and everything else, you have this cyber report that's due within 45 days to the regulators. So one item that maybe we can touch upon, because there is a separate piece of the law related to notification to regulators. From what I've seen, that's the one area that has varied between the states. When is it required to make a submission and notify the regulators when there's been an attack? Okay. New York is very strict. Pretty much no matter what happens, you have 72 hours. Okay. I think a lot of the other states, from what I've seen after that, have really given more judgment to management of the companies. Is that what you've seen as well?
They vary, and I think almost all states have now passed a breach notification law. Now, what we're talking about today is the model law, but that breach notification, that is certainly a hot topic as well. But yeah, they do vary, and the reality is that the 72 hours is once you're aware of it. A lot of times these breaches happened months ago, and that's problematic, as you can imagine.
That's a good point. And we'll talk about it some more, but again, just to point out, this is an annual. Once it is, this is a key point too. The report itself is for your state of domicile. So so if let's say you're licensed in 20 states, right, business in 20 states, but your home state, domicile state is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania would be the only state you have to actually submit a report to. Now I believe there's another slide about it, but if let's say if there is an attack or something like that on some policyholder data in another state that you write business in, you'd still need to, obviously, I'm sure the regulators would be in contact with you and want to see what your plan is and so forth.
And even in the absence of that breach, if you're doing business in one of the 9 states currently that we're talking about here, you have to follow these rules in order to be in compliance with that state, even though you're not submitting an annual report to them in order to do business in Ohio.
So that's an important point, Tony. So again, Pennsylvania has not adopted it. Ohio has. If you're writing business in Ohio, you need to be compliant with Ohio's law.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so we've talked already a bit about the risk assessment, but just to lay out a few items here for risk assessment. The risk assessment is assessing the likelihood and the potential damage. So the likelihood of something bad happening is what I call it, and what's the impact? What's the potential impact there? And then assess the sufficiency of the policies and procedures. So what do we have in place to help minimize that impact and that likelihood? And then it goes into employee training. Talks about information systems and networks and software and detecting, preventing, responding to attacks. So we've talked about attacks. And I think a lot of times folks kind of glaze over on some of these controls, kind of like the throw cushion in the boat.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
the throw cushion in my boat is tucked in the seat. You know, that's not its real purpose, right? But like the employee training, I think, you know, well, yeah, we've done employee training. We've been doing that for years, you know, and we need to make sure we keep it in front of us and that we're doing it, you know, using those controls and those tools to make sure that we're training our folks and that they know about these cyber attacks and how attackers will come in.
Very good.
And then just continuing with the risk assessment, it says implement information safeguards to manage the threats. And, you know, we haven't seen it yet, but I will say from experience in the healthcare industry, when the government, when there's a breach and the government looks at, okay, I want to see the risk assessment, and healthcare is the first thing they ask for. They really want to see, not only have you gone through the detail of these controls within the framework, but where have you measured and put a risk factor? So where have I looked at on you know, a map, if you will, a heat map, and said, okay, these are my higher risk items. Now, what am I going to do about these?
Right.
And so you really want to, that's a core part of the risk assessment is giving a risk level, not just saying, are we doing that? Or are we not doing it? Are we doing it okay?
Right.
What's the risk there? And
Exactly.
what should I do?
And also to emphasize again, this is what's in the law.
Right.
This is not something that you and I
Oh,
came
yeah.
up with for this presentation. These are the words right out of the
Right.
security model law. So just to emphasize that.
And then just common threads among the state laws, the annual risk assessments, using a standard framework. And again, I say such as NIST, cybersecurity, because it's so well
Right.
accepted. And then having the board involvement and accountability. Accountability, I don't think I pulled in the slides, but I did have a couple slides on another presentation I did recently. The accountability is extreme. I mean, they're serious. They want the board involved. They want the board to know about it. Gosh, even in Georgia, in the healthcare arena, that's what, 10 years old, right? They've just passed some new laws that if the board doesn't have training by a certain date, that they're like $10,000 fine per board
boy.
member. Now, I know that's a
Goodness.
different industry, different
Right.
state, but it
Right.
shows the intensity.
Right, exactly. Emphasizes the education
Right,
of the board.
exactly.
Okay. All right.
And this is a throwback. One of the things when you're in a boat, if you have a water rescue, the last resort is to go in the water. And so this is a way that you can attach that throw cushion and reel someone in.
Gotcha. All right.
So this is an interesting slide here, and this is just really focusing on the difference in a security risk assessment and a general controls audit.
Right.
You know, we do a lot of work for you guys in the financial
so this
statement
is an
audit.
important point to clarify.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this is, well, why don't you go through the slide, and I'll add some comments at the end.
Absolutely. I shared this for the first time in Michigan as I was presenting a couple weeks ago, and it was funny. You and I talked about the fact that after the session, I had, I think, at least 4 different auditors, and from different firms, that came to me. They were excited. They said, finally, someone has said this.
It's a sad statement. That's what we get excited about, but, you know.
So let's go through it real quick. So first of all, there's 2 main differences in a general controls audit and a risk assessment. Number 1 is the scope. So when we're talking about, when we do general controls work for you guys as a part of the financial statement audit,
Right.
our scope is financial data.
Right.
And how's that financial data protected,
Exactly.
access, you know, the basics, right?
Right.
A risk assessment, the scope is protected information or non-public people information. So in healthcare records, you know,
Right.
electronic healthcare records, and when we're talking about policyholder data, so we're not talking about financial
Right.
data. And then the second big piece difference here is the frameworks used.
I think that's the real biggie here, too.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's, again, it's a very hyper-technical type item, but
Right.
that's where I think it adds a lot of, it's much more intense, much more significant. Again, this annual, again, it's going to be an annual risk assessment.
Right.
So
Yeah,
let's go into
absolutely.
that.
So when we do the general controls work for you guys, there's not a hard set, you know, when you're talking about a non-public company,
Right.
there's not a hard set rule that says you have to use this framework
Right.
or these controls. So, you know, you could do, you could process 15 controls or so. And I just pull that number out and cover the basics to give you a basis for relying on the systems.
Right.
But when we're talking about a risk assessment, you're talking about 115 plus controls,
Right.
much more prescribed, much more thorough,
And what does that look like? Is your team, do you actually have to physically come on site, or are you doing that remotely, or
There is
maybe come on site the first time? And what's that look like?
Yeah, it's, like when we do, a lot of times we do financial statement audits, we're there maybe for a day or two. When we do a risk assessment audit, you're looking at 2 to 3 days on site, and you do that every year. Now, we can do a lot remotely.
And then wrap it up remotely.
Right, we do a lot remotely, and we try to do as much remotely as we can
Sure.
to
That's
minimize
yeah,
expenses
exactly, sure.
and, that kind of thing.
Okay. All right. Very good. Very good. But yeah, just to emphasize that from my perspective as an audit partner, because I've heard the comment from clients and board members like, oh, well, a couple years ago, we'll be fine once this insurance data security model law comes in place because you guys already do an IT review.
Right.
It's not the same thing.
Right.
It's nowhere even close to the same thing.
Right.
So.
I've had conversations with clients and back in the the healthcare industry,
Right.
and made the comment, well, who's doing your risk assessment? And they said, well, you are. And I'm like, no, we're not. That's totally not a risk assessment.
All right. Let's see.
So just talking about phishing stats, and this almost seems like an awkward, where did it come from?
Yeah,
but
the flow sort of broke up, but
yeah,
still,
the flow broke up.
So
Yeah.
applicable.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and I've just made kind of a conscious decision that I don't care what I'm talking about. I'm going to put phishing in there because it's been going on so long that we can't ignore. It's still the number one way for hackers to get in.
Right.
Just some stats here on how many people. We'll flip through, and you can head to the next one. On a daily basis, 80,000 people give away their information.
That's amazing.
Which is amazing, right? And if you look at the next slide, it really, to me, kind of gives you a picture of what does 80,000 people look like. I mean, that's, okay, so it's 93 at the Georgia Stadium.
Okay, so it's not as big as up in Happy Valley, but
No,
the
it's-
106,000.
no, we don't go quite that big.
So that's a
Or-
lot of people.
Yeah,
That's
it's a lot of people.
And that is one thing with, even on a daily basis, when I go through my emails, I'm very leery now. If there's any attachment I don't
Right.
recognize who
Right.
this is, I just delete it.
Right.
And I figure if it's important enough that I need to get that and that they need to get it to me, they'll send it to me again or they'll call me.
Right.
So, it's
But
just
you'd
not
be
worth-
amazed at how many folks in an organization don't really know about this.
Yeah.
So you and I, this is kind of the world we live in, right?
Right.
But there are a lot of folks within an organization that just aren't really aware that these
Right.
things are coming at them.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
So
just the
now
throw
what?
cushion. Yeah, now what? So the throw cushion is right. So if you have to walk away with one question in your mind, it's like, how can we better plan, prepare, prevent, and really position ourselves? So again, thinking from a board member standpoint,
Right.
what do I want to walk away? I
Right.
want to take us from where we are to a better stance.
Exactly.
And then just continuing that now what theme. Recognize that this isn't going away. We talked about that. This is not just picking on the insurance industry. This is an evolution.
And as we touched, there's many other rules and laws and regs that are affecting all businesses. This
Absolutely.
is not something that's specific to insurance.
Right. Make cybersecurity included in the board agendas. I mean, straightforward. Talk to manage about where you are in the relation to
And
the
that
requirements.
second bullet, it seems like a simple one, but
Right.
but it is a simple one
Right.
to get it on the table. I was
Right.
just in a board meeting yesterday, and we religiously follow that agenda.
Right.
So that's an easy way to make this a hot topic, if you will,
Right.
and start getting the ball rolling, is put it on the agenda.
Right, exactly. And then you just go through the list, begin working with on the Internet Security Program, regardless of where your state is in the
Right.
process of passing the law.
Right.
And then, have that risk assessment performed. Even if the law's not applying to you yet, get in front of it. Know where you are so that you know what you've got to deal with.
Right, exactly. And again, let me ask you this: is for a risk assessment, do you typically see, is that something that's done by outside consultants like yourself, or is it something that's done? Let's say if you're, I guess it depends on the size of the company and how robust your IT department is, but
Yeah, and most, to be honest with you, in most cases, especially small to mid-sized entities, have someone else outside the company do it.
that's what I thought.
They
Because
don't.
they're busy enough with
Right.
the day-to-day operations and maintaining the network and so forth. That,
Right.
and likewise too, I guess you really want a second set of eyes looking at it too,
Right.
versus an internal view.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's to me, again, from a board perspective, if I've got an external group doing the risk assessment, it's a more credible answer
Exactly.
of, okay, where are we? Compared
Exactly.
to if my IT group is assessing themselves.
Exactly. Right. Okay. We have a couple questions from the, that's the end of our slides here, but we have a couple questions from the audience here, Tony. Let's see.
Only pick the ones we like.
Okay. Let's see. So the first one I have here, does my company need to file a cybersecurity annual report to every state's insurance department that we write business in? We touched upon that before, so the answer is no.
Right.
It would only be your state of domicile. Right. But I guess to emphasize there, if you write business, license to write business, you still need to comply. Even though no report's being submitted, you still need to comply. Another one, let's see. Could you clarify, since PA has not passed this law, should our company be doing anything now?
Right.
The answer is yes. You should be.
Yeah, I mean, don't wait till the last minute.
Right.
I mean, I was here an hour and a half early. Just want to let's make sure I'm early. Let's prevent any flat tires, wrecks, that kind of thing. And so get in front of it. You know it's coming.
Yeah.
It's not a question.
We were looking at the number of states that have passed it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a few at the end of 18, then all of a sudden several in 19, 20. It's going to be another bulk of states. So it's coming very quickly. Let's see. We've got another one here. I don't think we have discussed the topic of cybersecurity at my recent board meetings. At the next meeting, where should we start?
I would start with that slide that I said print out. No lie. I mean, print that slide out and get it on the agenda. At the next board meeting, say we need to have this on our agenda, ongoing, and use that as just a template to begin to walk through and ask those questions.
Start the communication with management now, even if the answer is we've done nothing.
Right.
You'd want to know that now versus waiting until your state has passed the law. Okay, very good. Let's see, I think we have one more here. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, here's the last one we have. What's your opinion on the awareness of TPAs of this cybersecurity law and the impact it has on their organizations?
Yeah, I like my comment about the print and mail company that I talked to. I don't think there's as much awareness. I think in their mind, well, we're just taking a file and printing. Right. They don't think about the fact that they're taking a file that has sensitive data, and they're now housing that data.
Right.
So I think that awareness may be lower, especially in the small to mid-sized companies that are TPAs. So some of them, when you ask that question, they may go, "Oh, yeah, that's a good point." It's almost like they haven't really gone down that path yet because they didn't think about it that way.
And now too, I think from a company's perspective, you don't have to feel now, oh, I'm going to them because there's some unique insurance law.
Right.
Like you've mentioned throughout the presentation, there's several laws coming into place that are affecting all businesses.
Right.
This is just another one of them.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Well, I think those are all the questions we have. Oh,
we got one more. Okay.
Well, now we've been pressured. We know there's another one. So
please let us end on a good one, right?
Okay, this last question here is, we have a very strong spam filter, but is there training for employees for what not to click on?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah.
We have had emails come in from various folks that look like names of other people in the organization. So.
Right, exactly. The answer is absolutely, and how much time do we have? Because we could talk about that for a while. Yes, you want to do training. You want to...
But who would be some of the... Is there certain organizations that provide it? Is it something you can do online? Or
yeah, I mean, you can... I mean, gosh, our company does phishing simulations that has training involved. You could do it yourself. You could go out and, purchase the software on an annual fee software and do your own in-house phishing and training.
And how's it work? It sends like fake emails and then sees who's clicking on them, I guess?
No, exactly. So when you use a phishing tool like we do, or you could get on your own, it sends a phishing email that would look like one that would come from the bad guys, right? But it's not. It's from us or from your internal software. And then what you have the ability to do is to track who has opened it, who's clicked the link, and who maybe tried to enter data if it required that or asked for that. So then you have reporting on the back end that can show that, can give you the details of, oh, Jane Smith or Jim Doe opened this, so forth. But then what the newest phase is taking that to the next level, and we did this about 1.5 years ago, is having training that's related to that. So now when Jim Doe clicks the link, we can have already decided before we started that we're going to assign these 2 3-minute videos of training to Jim.
Okay.
And that's a great way to roll that training out. Now that's just one idea, one piece.
But there's lots of options out there for training on this topic. All right. All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you very much, Tony.
Great.
Thanks for
Good to
coming
see
up
you
from
again.
Georgia.
Absolutely.
Good to see you as always. And thank you to all those out there that participated in the webinar. And if you feel free, our contact information is on the last page of the slide. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.
Absolutely.
Via email. That would probably be easiest.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks again.